Hey everybody, what's going on? Jake Andrews here. Welcome back to my channel, Jake Andrews Music. And story time today, y'all. I want to tell you guys all about the time I sat in and played on stage and hung out with the legendary Albert King. King Albert, king of the blues guitar. Now, if you've watched some of my other videos, you may have seen pictures of me with Albert. But I want to tell you the background of how that came to be and how I had this amazing experience that really kicked off my professional career. So, my father was a professional musician. He was the longtime guitarist with the 60s and 70s blues, R&B, soul, and country band Mother Earth. He had played in numerous blues and R&B bands before that in the early and mid-60s as well. So from the time I was born, I was exposed to music, live music shows, and growing up here in Austin, Texas, the music was really spectacular back then. My dad got me started on guitar very early, and there are some pictures of me with a kid's guitar at the age of 3 years old, waiting to get up on stage with my dad at Jerry Jeff Walker's birthday bash. So I was already banging around on guitar at that age. But my dad didn't really sit me down to start teaching me stuff until I was about 6 years old. The first song I learned was Johnny Be Good, and in fact, he had me perform it for friends later that same day. Once I started learning from him, I progressed pretty fast. I started performing at the house for friends of his, performing at school, stuff like that. And in those days, he had me learning all of his favorite stuff that he grew up with from the 50s. Stuff like Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, Elvis, Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent, all the great 50s rock and roll songs. But after a year or so, he started introducing me to his old blues records. The early B.B. King stuff, early Freddie King, Albert Collins, Gatemouth Brown, and of course, Albert King. I actually started with learning Hideaway by Freddie King by ear, which really impressed my father. Later, he would bribe me to learn songs by ear, like Sweet Little Angel by B.B., Frosty by Albert Collins, Okie Dokie Stomp by Gatemouth, those kind of tunes. And around this time, my dad started taking me out to see some of these guys that were still coming through Austin and performing back then, pretty regularly. I think Chuck Berry was the first big concert I can remember going to when I was 4 or 5 years old. What was really cool about that show that I remember was that it was a double bill with Bo Diddley, two of the legendary 50s rock and roll originators. But for some reason, Bo never showed up. So Chuck Berry did an entire set of his songs, and then he came back and he did the entire set of Bo Diddley's songs. Really cool, man. And I remember going to see Albert Collins when I was about 6 or 7 years old. But one night when I was 8 years old, my father said, "We're going out tonight. We're going down to Antone's." That was the legendary blues club here in Austin. And Albert King is going to be playing tonight. Although I was learning and playing songs by all of these legendary artists at that time, I of course didn't really have the perspective at that age to understand how amazing it was to be seeing these guys live and in person. So I tagged along with my dad, got to the club. It was completely packed with a line to get in. Well, when we got inside, my dad pushed our way up through the crowd, and he must have had me up on his shoulders at the front of the stage. People probably thought it was cute to have a little kid up there. So I sat up there right in front of the stage directly underneath Albert King on my dad's shoulders. And I watched his set in amazement. Well, at some point during the show, Albert leaned down to my level and said, "Son, do you play guitar?" "Yeah, I sure do," I told him. He smiled real big and continued playing. So the band takes a break eventually, and somebody from the club or Albert's band came over to us and told my dad, "Hey, Albert wants to see your son backstage." So my dad and I made our way into the backstage, and we had to let the bodyguard know that Albert requested we come back and talk with him. Well, when we got back there was no one in the room except for Albert smoking his pipe. He didn't want any of the band back in there with him that night for some reason. Nobody else was allowed in. So we sat down, and I just remember my dad and he really chatting it up for a long time. I assumed they were old friends because, well, they were just talking so much. So after about 20 or 30 minutes of visiting, Albert said, "Well, Jake, you got your guitar with you?" "No, sir, I don't have it with me." My dad quickly interjected, "Hey, we just live about 5 or 10 minutes away. I will race home right now and grab the guitar and be right back." So my dad takes off, he leaves me there alone in the dressing room with Albert King. Just Albert and I sit there chatting for another 20 minutes alone. And to this day, I have no idea what we talked about. Albert King and an 8-year-old kid back there. Finally, my dad gets back with my 1959 Fender Duosonic guitar. I still have it over here. Albert says, "Well, Jake, the band's going to start the next set without me, and I want you to be up there playing with them. And then I will come on stage after that." Now, Albert had a full horn section, and the tenor player was the band leader. The band's all getting up on stage, getting ready to start the second set. So my dad goes up to the band leader and says, "Hey, Albert has invited my son to get up and play this set with y'all." The guy looked surprised and said, "Well, okay, where is he?" "He's right there," my dad said, and he pointed down at me. You couldn't believe how big the band leader's eyes got when he saw a little kid waiting to go on stage with his little 3/4 size guitar. So I get up there, but then kind of realize I wasn't yet comfortable playing standing up. I don't even know if I had a strap. They set me up on the piano bench right there next to Albert's amp. So I played Hideaway, Freddie King classic, with the band, and people at the back of the club were standing up on tables so that they could see me, as I was so small sitting down on the bench. Then they announce Albert, and the whole band goes into an R&B shuffle instrumental to bring him back up on stage. I was a little unsure of what to do, as I had already been playing, so I figured, well, now Albert was coming up and I would be done. I started to unplug my guitar when Albert came right over to me and he said, "Jake, I thought you was gonna play the blues with me." I ended up staying up and jamming with Albert for about another 20 minutes. And a really funny story I will throw in here is that 5 years later, I was performing in Memphis at B.B. King's Club on Beale Street. I was going to be playing with a house band there, and they were known as the King Bees. The band consisted of a drummer, bassist, rhythm guitarist, keyboardist, tenor player, and a trumpet player. So on the first day, we're rehearsing during the afternoon for the show that night. So we met everybody, but noticed that Charles, the tenor saxophone player, was looking a little confused for a few minutes after my dad introduced me to him. Finally, his eyes got real big and he exclaimed, "Are you that little kid Jake that got up and played with Albert King years ago?" "Yeah, that was me." He laughed and said, "Man, I played with you. I was the band leader on the show that night. I couldn't believe it when I saw how little you were and that Albert wanted to get you up to play with him. But you sure did blow everybody away that night." His name was Charles Campbell, and he was the nephew of the great R&B singer and guitarist Milton Campbell, whose stage name was Little Milton. And if you don't know about Little Milton's music, you need to look him up. What a legend. Charles worked for years with his uncle Little Milton and with Albert King as well. He had a lot of great stories about the two of those guys, Milton and Albert, arguing with each other over who was going to get Charles to go out with them on their upcoming tours. Charles asked me what I was going to wear that night, and I said, "Well, what I'm wearing now, jeans and a t-shirt." He said, No, man, no. We dress up here in Memphis. You got to get dressed up." So he sent my dad and I over to a really fancy men's shop where they sold all kind of wild colored suits and shirts, all this wild menswear. So we went over there, and I was about 13 at the time. We got a full red suit, a full silver suit. We got like green lizard skin dress shoes, all this crazy white suede slip-on shoes. It was so cool, man. And so I got that red suit to wear for the show that night. Now back to Albert King, you have to imagine how small I was and how monstrous Albert King was, especially from my perspective. He was already a huge guy, but to me he seemed like He was about 7 feet tall. And I just remember his hands were like the size of footballs. They were huge, man. Well, the crowd went totally berserk, and Susan Antone, who was often there taking great pictures on nights like these, this was Clifford's sister Susan, she snapped a few great photos that night, and they ran in the local newspaper that next week. And Susan said she had never in all the years he had played there seen Albert smile so big as he did that night. And Albert was not known for getting other guitar players up on stage with him. There's the famous story, famous around here of course especially, of Stevie Ray wanting to get up and sit in with him in the early days of Antone's. This is in the mid to late 70s. Of course, Albert King was his absolute idol, his hero. Clifford Antone himself went to Albert and he said, "Man, there's this amazing kid guitarist here. He plays all of your licks. He sounds just like you. You gotta get him up on stage with you." And Albert told Clifford, "No, I do not let nobody get up and sit in with me." Well, I guess Stevie begged Clifford, and so Clifford went again to Albert King and he said, "Man, you gotta get this kid up on stage, please." "No," I said, "I don't get anyone up on stage to play with me." Well, what happened next was, during Albert's set, Stevie Ray just walked up on stage and plugged in and just started playing over Albert. And so when Albert heard him playing all of his licks with his usual ferocious style, he was really blown away. And he did a big dramatic move where he went and hid his Flying V guitar behind the stage curtain to kind of shield her from Stevie's aggressive guitar playing. So that was a legendary night, and that kind of kicked off Stevie Ray's career in a big way as well. And that's really how Stevie and Albert King became such close friends. But Stevie had to literally go against Albert's wishes and ambush the stage. And I can tell you that must have taken a lot of balls, mucho cajones, man, because Albert was well known for being a very intimidating guy. However, all I can say was that he was a sweetheart to me that night, and we had an amazing time, and I'm still amazed that it happened. I mean, what are the chances? Albert King in the middle of his set, coming up to a little 8-year-old melanin challenged kid and asking him to get up on stage and play with him. Amazing. So Albert passed away a few years later, and I never got to play on stage with him again. But really that night kick-started my professional career. Soon afterwards, my dad started bringing me down to sit in with many more legendary blues artists that would come through Austin. Clifford Antone, once that happened with me and Albert King, he would get me up with everybody that came through. And so pretty soon after that, I actually started opening the shows for these artists. I would play with the Antone's house band backing me up, and I'd do a full set of instrumentals. I didn't sing then. I would do that all the time, many weekends with all of these legendary artists. And that is really how it all began for me. Many years later, I was playing another show in Memphis, and I got a cab ride over to the Peabody Hotel there. The cab driver saw my guitar and started asking me about it. Well, we got to talking, and it turns out he had played guitar with Al Green. Not only that, he had been in Albert King's band, and he played with him up until Albert's death. Then we realized he had been on that show as well, playing in the band with Albert King when I sat in. So he showed me this great picture of he and Stevie Ray when they were on a show together with Albert King. Very, very cool. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this little story time history, and I've got a lot more amazing stories like this I'm going to be sharing soon. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave the video a like. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to my channel. Hit that bell icon so you can get notifications every time I release a new video. And my friends, I will see you soon. Peace and love.